Okay, good morning, everyone. Sorry it took a bit late to connect to the audio. This is Carol. Today I'll be presenting about using analytic data to study the waste tourism system, supporting better decision-making to reduce marine littering. So I'll start talking about New Life to Plastic, which is a project that we launched in 2016. And the project has been conducted in collaboration with the NGO Social Innovation team for which I worked. The project addressed the issue of mismanaged plastic waste in urban and natural environment, including data collection, design solution, policy recommendation, and awareness and education activities with local groups. There's two main study areas, which are Nairobi, and in particular the village of Kibera in Kenya, and two other sites in Zanzibar, Tanzania. And our mission is to use analytic data on material flows and end-of-life management of plastic waste to support behavioral change, awareness, and opportunities stemming from plastic waste and policy alternatives to reduce marine littering. So our goals are to disseminate awareness and mobilizing environmental action, exploring local-based alternatives, comparing existing policy models and their application to different contexts. So not just from the study area we're exploring, but also like from other similar contexts. And finally, boosting pro-environmental behaviors and practices. So here are a few milestones of our project. So as I said before, the project was launched in 2016, starting from an expedition in Kenya during the spring of 2016. So after we realized how much of a problem, like the mismanagement of plastic was, we decided to launch this project called New Life to Plastic in the summer 2016. In spring 2017, we decided to launch free education workshop on plastic recycling. In spring 2018, we conducted more workshop on marine littering, which is the point at which we decided to shift the focus from more urban setting to like coastal areas and to study how this would impact to like marine ecosystems. In summer 2018, we had a second expedition in Zanzibar, Tanzania. And so the main results I'm going to present today, they relied on this second expedition. And finally, in terms of future work, we'd like to conduct more research on systemic changes to local industrial system, integration of citizen-based science to supply real-time data on marine littering and plastic pollution, dialogue and collaboration amongst all actors along the supply chain of plastic, and finally, efficiency assessment of proposed intervention. So to start with, I'll start talking about the waste tourism system, which we consider as a complex system for the production of waste. Now, okay, so in terms of the impact of tourism growth, we have to consider different impact. For example, since we're in a consumption-driven society, we have many different issues coming from waste production, such as mismanagement of waste, because of population growth in terms of local population, but also tourist population. And in fact, Zanzibar is highly relying on this flow of tourists. And also we consider low recycling rates, inefficiency of beach cleanups, and inadequate or non-existent infrastructure, especially in coastal areas close to the main beaches. And so the expansion of tourism accelerated the demand for natural resources and increased waste generation. As mentioned before, the tourism waste sectors also develop at different pace. So we're at a point in which the tourism sector is highly developed, but at the same time the local waste infrastructure cannot cope with increasing waste production, especially on tourism sites, which are usually managed differently than municipal areas for the rest of the island. And recently introduced new type of waste material, such as plastic. For example, think about all single-use containers that we can find at the main hotel for shampoo, conditioner, or other body products. And so the detrimental effect of marine pollution include different impacts, as you can see in the graph on the right. And such as the deterioration of tourism side, we can also cause in long term the loss of tourism revenues and disinvestment in the sector if we don't take urgent action to cope with marine pollution. So the third sector we're responsible for plastic pollution, and in particular on site we found that the main sector that contribute to like waste pollution are tourism on one side, as I mentioned before, like household, like local businesses, especially like small businesses, which are like selling to tourists mainly, and also like fisheries producing a lot of plastic waste, such as like clothes, gear, and other material, and also like other like local activities. So we finally decided to focus on tourism because we found that tourism was like the main producer of plastic material. And in particular, because like at this moment, like the waste, and in particular the plastic waste produced by tourism, is not being handled by a local governmental system. So on one side, we have like the municipal waste collection, which is like collecting waste and in the main urban and residential areas. And we also have like on the other side, tourism, which is not covered by this municipal like collection. So what we found about tourism is that tourism is at the same time an agent and a victim. So it's an agent in terms of like being responsible for marine litter, and at the same time is a victim because like tourism is also like affected by marine litter. As I mentioned before, one of the long-term impact could be like the deterioration of main tourism sites for so that like people are unable like to enjoy beaches and like, you know, like this paradise in Zanzibar if there's no infrastructure on local beaches to like allocate and collect like the waste that is being produced. The research focus, as mentioned before, is Zanzibar. In particular, I focus on like too many areas because I wanted an area to be representative of like urban and residential life sites, and another area to be representative of like local beaches and so like the main tourism attractions. So the areas we focus on are Stone Town, which is like the biggest town on the island, and Nungwi, which is like a tourism site located on the very far north. Every year, like Zanzibar produces around like 92,000 metric tons of waste, of which 70% is discharged on the environment. And we think that like a big like percent of this amount will like eventually end up in the ocean. There's only one company, which is Zenric Plastic Company Ltd, which handle like kind of life management of plastic waste, and especially they collaborate with the tourism sector. And as of now, they're able to collect 9% of all plastic being generated by tourism through like collaboration with main hotels, especially in the north. And as for reference, Africa as a whole discharges 4.4 million metric tons a year of plastic in the ocean. As per our study, we decided to integrate both qualitative and quantitative data in order to have like a view of what like people perceive on site and what we could observe. So in terms of qualitative data, we collected data for structure with 57 participants employed in the tourism or waste sector. For example, manager and staff at the main hotel, or like business owner and some of like the local shops selling like souvenir and gift stores, but also like people employed in the waste sector, in the municipal waste sector. So like going from waste pickers, like street swipers, and also like people working for the government. And we also decided to conduct a focus group with 19 participants from a minority community. And in particular, we decided like to engage like people from the Italian community, since we wanted to see how they perceive like moving from a country in which there is like a segregated collection to a country in which like segregated collection is not like a municipal service, and we wanted to understand what their experience was and how they dealt with this change. And finally, we collected quantitative data through observation of littering practices, such as direct littering, like in the environment and the ocean, observation and enumeration of source, amount, type, and item of waste material, and finally, observation and enumeration of number, location, type, and condition of waste facility on beach and like coastal areas. So you can find some picture of what we could collect, and as you can see from the picture, most waste like consists of like low density polyethylene or mixed plastic coming from packaging, and also like PET coming from water bottles. And And all these pictures are taken in the two areas previously mentioned, and in particular, like in tourism sites, closer to coastal areas. So our analysis showed there's like 6 main types of waste, which are like plastic, paper, food waste, e-waste, textile, and others, in which we consider like, for example, cigarette fat or like aluminum and ceramics. In terms of plastic, as you can see, like we found like the main producer of plastic is tourism for the production of bottle, packaging, bags, flip-flops, cups, plates, cutlery, and straws. So it's mainly like single-use plastic coming from the like food sector. Then we found like large foreigner-owned tourism activities, which produce bottles and packaging. So again, in the food sector mainly. We also found like local small tourism activities producing like especially packaging and bags. And finally, like the household, which produce mainly flip-flops, like fishing nets. So like we also consider like fisher as part of like household for this analysis, packaging and tires. I would like to talk about like a few results from the interview because I find it interesting how like people perceive tourism as being like a major component, like in the production of waste and in particular plastic waste, and how we observe like this like tourism sector being responsible for the production of waste. So here are like 5 questions that I thought were really interesting to look at. So the first one was, do you think that tourism generate waste? And the 50.9% of respondents say yes. And in particular, you can find here some citation about it. For example, I was talking to this waste speaker and he could notice that like the production of waste like increases during like high tourism season as compared to low tourism season. Another question that I found particularly interesting was, does plastic increase due to tourism? And only 15.8% of respondents say yes. And when they say yes, they mention in particular plastic bottles because they said like tourists don't want to drink from like tap water, and also they use like bottled water for brushing their teeth. So like there's like different type of uses they make. Another question was, do you think the tourists are respectful of the environment? And again, like the relative majority said yes. And they said like there is a for everywhere culture which tourists don't usually like apply. So like they said they try to look for like dustbins or like other waste facilities where like on the beach or like on being like tourist area. Another question was, do you think tourists throw waste at sea? And just like 15.8% of respondents say yes. And for example, this tour guide like told me, so like people like throwing like waste in the sea like from boat. So like we started like looking at like this dynamics of like boat and different like tour expedition, for example, like blue safari and other kind of expedition like in the sea, and how tourists behave on those like expeditions. And finally, another question was like, do you see plastic at sea? And around like 1/3 of respondents say yes, but they couldn't say if it was coming mainly from tourists or like from local activities. So as a summary of like what we just said in our main results, like the main research question was like how we can like reduce marine littering, and we found there's like 3 different sectors which we should focus on. So the first one is like post-consumer waste management, and in particular we look at like collection rates, the potential for recycling, and like how to reduce leakages into the environment. And in this sector, we can find some limitation. For example, the lack of infrastructure, like the increased waste coming from tourism, the presence of both organic and inorganic contamination. So sometimes like there is potential for recycling, but at the same time, the material is being like contaminated. So, and there is lack of technology to handle that waste. And finally, for like the leakages into the environment, we need to deal with like the mismanagement of waste first place. The second sector we wanted to look at is the stakeholder engagement. In particular, when we talk about like stakeholders, we talk about the municipal like waste sector on one side and the tourism sector on the other side. And what we found is that like there's lack of integration between the two systems. So sometimes there is like waste being produced by tourists, but there's no municipal services which can handle like this amount of waste. And also we want to tackle civic engagement, so the different group of the population, so the consumers directly. And there's different barriers and limitations that right now are not empowering people in order to take care of their own waste. Finally, we wanted to tackle the management of waste facility on or near beaches. So we think we should focus on the use of facilities, and right now there's limited use and sometimes limited availability of those facilities, and information on material. So for example, what can be recycled, where recycled material should be disposed of, and other information regarding how to handle this waste. As mentioned before, we want to use this data in order to support decision making, and also more related to the economics of marine litter. So within this session, we want to investigate different preventive measures and instruments in order to reduce marine litter. And for example, tackling the market-based instrument. Such instrument aim to encourage the change in consumer behavior by altering the economic of incentives in place. In order to conduct this analysis, we wanted to consider 4 different types of stakeholders and the different action that each type of stakeholder should take in order to address marine litter. First place, we wanted to tackle the public sector and utilities. And they, in particular, they engage in market-based instrument to cut off the mitigation cost. Second place, we want to tackle consumer, which engage in information and awareness on consumer contribution towards marine litter. For example, specific approaches should be based on existing littering context to address different segments of the population for awareness and information, as mentioned before. Third, the tourism sector, which should address preventive and responsive measures. So for example, we can think of integration and dialogue with existing municipal system and local stakeholder. And finally, the producer, which should engage in producer responsibility action. For example, the producer responsibility model, make the producer responsible for post-consumer life stage of plastic. So the producer is directly responsible of disposing of plastic waste. So out of those different groups, we wanted to focus in particular on the public sector and utilities, as we thought that changing the trend of the public sector could influence directly all other groups. So few actions that could be taken by the public sector and utilities deal with the some market-based instrument, as mentioned before, because they're the most cost-effective instrument in terms of mitigation. So there's a range of different action that they could take. For example, landfill taxes, which means charge per ton of waste landfill. They differ based on type of waste and related environmental impact. So for example, there's different impact produced by e-waste or hazardous waste, as compared to more organic waste or paper. Another type of action is infrastructure changes. So we suggest the use of port waste facility, in particular when we think of the waste that is produced by the fishery and the tourism sector, that would ensure that this infrastructure facility are developed and being maintained. Then we have the product taxes and charge, which include the ban on import, trade, sale of plastic, such as plastic bags and other soft plastics. We have the deposit refund scheme, which is the deposit charge, for example, on soft beverage bottles or other plastic packs. And finally, direct investment in infrastructure, such as trash can and other secure waste collection station on beach and in coastal areas. So within this framework, price signal that alter the economic incentives can be effective as they provide consumer with an incentive to opt for more environmentally friendly choices. So we wanted to look at what can motivate people to be more environmentally friendly. And so we focus on the intrinsic motivation that boost these pro-environmental friendly choices. Of course, there are some limitations to these models because like they assume that like people would act according to a rational behavior. So people like facing like this new incentive, they will like act more environmental friendly because they have an incentive. But of course, like this incentive will like change based like on the segment of the population we're considering. So an alternative that we thought is like reshaping this economic principle, not only focusing on like rational choices and behavior, but also like adding the psychological insight to the rational choice theory, which is why like conducting interview came handy, like since we could like directly like test what people like cared about. And so we stand for a shift in a perspective from a more traditional economic system to a behavioral economic system. And we think that this approach could like involve people's preferences, which are not like usually considered in the classic, you know, economic like models. So there are some limitation of non-behavioral approaches. For example, like they deal with the internal validity and with the external validity of like this approach. So our approach in this sense would like handle more like the awareness perception of tourism growth from like local population, and also its implication on the island environment in terms of waste production. So how the like production of waste from the tourism sector would like impact directly on like the environment in Zanzibar. And also like we want to like include like how education changes how education could change like local behavior. So like if we increase like information, like dissemination of information and like different like educational programs, how would that like impact on people being more or less, you know, like responsible for like producing waste? So we want to consider like education and awareness as kind of incentives in order to affect like local behavior. And as like incentive scheme are generally considered a valid solution to environmental problem, it's still necessary to analyze like their effectiveness in each like case study. For this reason, as a next step, we would like to launch like a survey in order to understand what can like boost like pro-environmental behavior and how people can be more responsible for their action and like to consider what their like choices bring in terms of like implication on the environment. Okay, this was it. Thank you. I would also like to mention that like this economic and social impact and behavior like section is being developed by my colleagues. So if you have any question about that, feel free to email him and he will be more than happy to like respond to any of your questions. And he's like, sorry, you couldn't join us for this presentation today. Do you have any question about the data collection and like other findings that we had from our project, or like how the project developed? And I'll be more than happy to address your question. Thank you.
Hi, Carol. Thanks for the presentation. Does anyone have any questions? You can feel free to send them in the chat. Yeah, feel free to send any questions. Thanks so much, Carol. If there aren't any questions at the moment, the presentation will be available online, and then they can either email us their questions, or they can. I see your email addresses in the presentation.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Okay.
It was very interesting to hear.
Oh, I think there's a question now.
I see someone sent one. Okay.
Okay.
Hi, Carol. Thank you for your presentation. I'm in Mossel Bay, South Africa, and currently running a program called See the Change. Basically, I'm looking for ideas to get our local communities more environmentally friendly, and I guess I would like some advice on how I can start, maybe start up something, or what route I can take.
Okay. Yeah, this is really interesting. And as I mentioned before, like we wanted to develop like a survey in order to understand like, you know, how to tackle like the different like interests and like what can like incentivize and motivate people towards like being more responsible and like let's say care more for the environment in which we live. And in terms of like environmental education program, we developed through a workshop, and we started like for mainly for like K-12. So we developed this workshop with children, and we wanted like to make them aware of like what we can do with some recycled materials. So for example, like one of the first like series of workshops we developed in Kenya was like we used some recycled material that they produced at the school so they could see what they throw out, what it can become. So like we used, for example, like plastic bottle and like aluminum can, like coming from like the local kitchen. And we created some days for like, and we planted flowers. So, you know, it's like a funny and creative way to like transform a waste that you produce. So you see this like item being used during its first life, becoming a waste and like being used in its second life. And potentially we can do this like, you know, a certain number of time. So we thought that was really like interesting. Another strategy that we used like still with kids was like showing them videos of what are like the negative impact of marine littering. So for example, we show them video of like marine fauna being affected by the production of like plastic and plastic like circulating widely in the ocean. And we found like when we use like animals in our like videos and presentation, like kids were more touched and they were more encouraged like in preventing that waste from like entering the ocean. So we think like a strategy is like to use what people care about and like let them know like how like their action could bring to some like negative impacts for like, for example, the animal they care about. Something else would be also like, for example, in Zanzibar, which like mainly rely on tourism for like their GDP, is really important to let like producer of waste understand how the production of waste would eventually bring to some changes in the tourism sector if action are not taken. So for example, like Zanzibar has this beautiful like coral reef, but like what if we keep producing plastic and like this plastic affect the health and like subsistence of like the coral reef? Like at some point tourists will not be willing like, you know, to go to Zanzibar to see like these beauties. So like we need really to tackle like what are the implications for us like first place, and like how like the environment like we live in will be like modified in a not too like far future. I hope this answered your question, and like if you have any other question, I'm more than happy like to share our experience. I would also like to mention if you know of any like local activities that are being done in South Africa or like similar context, for example, like based like on in coastal areas. If you know of any successful cases, like to use those cases like to empower communities and let community know like this group of people has been successful doing like these particular practices. So like if they see like some cases has been developed and they've been successful, like they can be inspired by the work of other like communities as well.
Okay, thank you, Carol. I have a question. Do you have any future plans to monitor whether the suggestions that you presented, whether those are being implemented in any way?
Yeah.
Yes, the studies that we could keep an eye out for.
Yeah. So right now we're working on a report to like include all our findings and how we like and the suggestion we would like to like, you know, implement. So like, and after that, like our goal is like to publish this report and like to like disseminate it like through within like local institution, and in particular we have contact with Zanric, the plastic recycling company mentioned for the presentation, and we would like to reach out to them and trying to collaborate with them to like create solutions which are like based on the local like context. And we would like also like to develop like this survey like to understand in which direction to go, because of course it's like really easy to like, find a solution based on other case study, but like if you have like a grasp of situations locally, it's really hard to implement like suggestion and potential solution which could actually work. So this is what we're working on right now, and if you have any other question in the future, like we hope like we could answer to those as well.
Okay, thank you. That's very interesting. If there aren't any other questions, people obviously are welcome to email you or to email the webinars at SST Africa, and we can forward any questions on to you. Thank you so much. On behalf of Sustainable Seas Trust, I just want to thank you for taking the time to share with us today and to present your work. It's very interesting, and yeah, it's very cool.
Okay, thank you. Have a wonderful day, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.